If you're degenerates like us, you have a ton of dynasty teams and a lot of different roster builds, but chances are you have that one or two spots in the end of your roster where you're just wondering who to plug in. So today we're going to dive deep and talk deep dynasty stashes. So stick with us as I try and cue up the intro next. Welcome into the double FU, the FU times two. I am Jeremy Schulman at FF_Rebel. This is, let's see if I get it right. Nope, we don't know which way we're pointing. Oh, this one, Jesse Moeller at JMoeller05. Jesse, today we're talking deep dynasty stashes. We are talking under 25% rostership. The list is ugly. So first, how are you doing? And second, how ugly are we going to get today?
If we're not talking about the four-string running back on the Browns, I don't want to hear it from you, folks. This is what we're talking about here. We're going deep. It's going to be a fun, entertaining show. Guys that, for one reason or another, we like the situation, or maybe it's a combination of both. So, it's going to be fun. So, yeah, I'm excited. And, we're degenerates. This is what we talk about. This is what we thrive for. This is what we do 365 days a year, right? So why not make a show out of it?
That's it, man. And I was looking at some of the names on this list that were, again, under 25% rostership on Sleeper. And I actually had some guys stashed on some rosters that were within that realm. And I was like, nope, I'm not including that guy. I'm not recommending anyone else get as dirty as I've been on some of my rosters. So, yeah, it's getting really, really ugly today. So, hey, speaking of ugly, let's get ugly with quarterbacks first, and let's talk about, Jesse, your favorite under 25% rostered quarterback. Who are you stashing on your dynasty rosters at QB? Jamie, hopefully you stick around. It's about to get real ugly up in here.
As my daughter's yelling in the background, you can tell she's hyped for this particular player. Yeah, I've been burned like 1,000 times by this player. So it's like, why not get burned 1,001 times? So shame on me, as my daughter's yelling in the background. That's Carson Wentz. We're going to talk about Carson Wentz here because the quarterback position is the hardest to find true stashes at. Like, it's extremely rare, like, we find the Geno Smiths of the world, because a couple of years ago, Geno was just going through the muck. Like, people did not care of him. He landed in Seattle, finally got a chance to show himself. The interesting thing is, like, he's behind the greatest quarterback of all time, Patrick Mahomes, right now, Kansas City. So it's a little bit tougher for him. But my whole thought process is, if an injury happens to Mahomes, he's going to be the best option available on the market that they're going to have. So that's why they brought him in, where you can give a guy that gives you fancy production. Now, it's a little maddening to watch him play. We saw how it kind of ended in Indy for him. But overall, when I'm looking for someone at the quarterback position, I'm looking for someone that can give me not just a week. So if it's the rushing guys, like another guy's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but I just don't think he's that good of an NFL quarterback. But I want a guy that I could think that could play the season out. And that's the whole case for Carson Wentz. He's basically just a forgotten about guy. So like if Mahomes gets injured, God forbid, we don't want that. But if that happens, we have a guy that you could put in your QB2 slot in Superflex, or you could spot start him in one QB leagues where he'll give you fancy production, because the offense, the scheme, all that stuff is really set up for any quarterback this year. So obviously it's not going to be Mahomes level, but it'll be like, 70% of Mahomes type stuff. So that's my case for Carson Wentz. He was a good fancy quarterback a long time ago. I'm hoping he did it again. So give me 1 second.
Yeah. What's interesting about Wentz, though, is the fact that, he's done it before. He's certainly capable of running a team, and we know that he's in the best possible situation. Of course, Patrick Mahomes is the best QB of all time, or trending that way. But at the same time, he's got Andy Reid in place. He's got all those brand new weapons in place. He's got a running game in place. And a decent defense. So Carson Wentz can be this Brad Johnson, Joe Flacco type guy who doesn't have to do it all, who can feel a little bit more relaxed back there, and who can be viable. Again, God forbid there's any sort of injury to Patrick Mahomes. So I like that take. The only thing that I'll ask you, Jesse, is do you think Carson Wentz is capable of leading a team in the locker room? Because I think that's what has him bouncing around from team to team. The guys don't like him. They don't.
Entirely possible. Yeah. This, if you remember years ago when they won the Super Bowl in Philadelphia, this is the whole issue, is because he was upset because like he didn't get a win. Like they won despite him because he was on that would BD in Nick Foles. Like they won with Nick Foles. He was upset sitting on the sideline, which I kind of get because you want to be involved in that. But this was actually, I think it was Tariq Cohen that brought it up, if I remember correctly. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, this came up and it's kind of been an issue that's been lingering around with him. I think now he's a lot more mature. Like he's pushing 30, you know? So I think at this point in his career, he's realized who he is and where he's at. So it's up to him, obviously. Like that's kind of the unknown with him. And we'll find out if it happens where he's starting quarterback and it starts unraveling. I think you'll know the answer sooner rather than later with him. Overall, it's hard for me to speculate on that because, you know, when you're young, you think you're the hot shot. This guy was up for MVP at one point in time. So he was probably thought he was like the greatest gift ever. Turns out, well, you know, there's a good way of getting humbled, and it's called getting benched and rotting on benches for a few years. So I think he's been humbled, and I think he's probably a better person for it. We'll see if that works out, but that is my hope with him. So yeah, it's definitely a question mark.
For sure. And speaking of Carson Wentz not being liked in the locker room, I think we have a similar situation in Pittsburgh. Just to be clear, Jamie, this has been debunked. If you watch the video again, Russell Wilson is clearly in the background watching what's going on. But it's, you know, there is kind of this sense that Justin Fields could take over because Russell Wilson is just not liked as well by his teammates. Maybe it's different with Mike Tomlin there, but it's a concern for me. And the fact that these rumors keep, proliferating no matter where Russell Wilson goes, and he's not helping himself with Subway ads and, team hype videos and things like that. Thankfully, he's been quiet, but that's just the concern for me, is these sorts of situations where the team just doesn't like the quarterback.
The best part is when you catch Russell Wilson code switching. And if those don't know about code switching, it's people that change their voice and like the tone that they talk with. The peak of that was like Paris Hilton back in the day. She did that. You'll see a lot of African-American players do it to like fit in. Russell Wilson's like the guy that's done it forever. They catch him talking in the media, and then you catch him like offside, and it's like his voice switches, and everyone's like, "Oh, interesting. So you're fake, right?" So yeah, there's a lot of that with Russ. And as a Seattle fan, I've seen it over the years of interesting situations with Russell Wilson. I think the funniest thing with the report that Jamie's talking about, it was this NFC News like Twitter account that basically put out a tweet like it was a 1990s WWE fight. They're like, and Russell said something to Fields, and then Fields slapped Russell Wilson across the face. And I was like, what is going on here? This is not happening at all. So, and somebody talked about it as news. I was like, you guys got to take your news with a grain of salt, please, because that's not what happened at all. But it was a hilarious tweet. I'll give that a copy because I was cracking up reading that tweet.
Well, the first I heard about it was Fantasy Gazette saying a defensive player took a danger witch out of a sandwich and threw it at Russ or at Justin Fields, which I was dying at. But but that's the concern for sure. And you never know. And SC, of course, coming through with what actually happened. SC, solid actual reporting, so we appreciate this. Yes. Patrick Queen Patrick Queen with a late hit. Yeah. Coming in, he forgot he was on the Steelers. That's what happened. He came over from Baltimore. He forgot. He just saw red or gold, and he just went after it.
It's too funny. Yeah, like you'll see stuff like this happen. We saw a fight between a couple of Dallas guys, a tight end and a D lineman. You see fights happen in training camp preseason all the time. Like this happens every year. It's just are we able to catch it on TV? Like sometimes it'll get reported and they don't catch it. It's not big news. But when we have the video of it, right, we're like, oh, that's a big, right? Same thing with the Russell Wilson, the Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson things. Like we've seen that multiple times off season. I'm like, yeah, that's like two passionate guys debating football. Like it's gonna happen. It's not a big deal. So yeah, I just follow that on whatever it happens.
For sure. But let's quickly turn it back to Carson Wentz. I don't really want to say anything more about him. We've talked too much about him, but other than the fact that he's only 18.9% rostered. I mean, if you have a deep bench stash, a bench spot available to stash someone, especially if you have Patrick Mahomes, you could do a lot worse than Carson Wentz. You could do a lot worse, like stashing Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor, now a New York Jet. He's my stash. He's 34 years old, 24.2% rostered. And really, this is the only reason that you would stash Tyrod is because of Aaron Rodgers and the fact that he's way older than Tyrod Taylor is at this point in his career. We know he's got the recent injury history. We know the Jets are trending toward Super Bowl contention, which is why they brought in a vet like Taylor in the event that Rodgers goes down again. We've seen Taylor in recent years be able to support an offense. We know he can do that again. And Jesse, let me ask you this. How many yards last season on the New York Giants did Tyrod Taylor rush for on 38 attempts?
Ooh, that's actually a question because like he was actually cooking for a minute and then he went down with an injury. So 38 attempts, I'll say probably I'll say about 150-ish would be my guess. This is a complete guess. I have no idea.
Good guess. 197 yards.
Ooh,
So pretty decent, 5+ yards per clip. So Tyrod Taylor still has that ability. Of course, he needs to stay healthy himself, but he adds a little bit of that rushing ability. And he's someone that I'll stash over a guy like Tyler Huntley, who's significantly younger, 8 years younger, but just not sure that he can stay on the field. That's what we were talking about, especially with Wentz. You know that if he gets that opportunity, he's going to be able to stay on the field. Tyrod Taylor, I think, as well. I don't know who's behind him. Maybe it's Mike White still, or is he in? I don't know where he is. Maybe he's in Miami. It doesn't matter who it is because Tyrod will be able to hold that job as long as he doesn't get any rib injections. So we'll see.
Tough break, man. My man got the worst end of it. He did give us Justin Herbert's magic career, but yeah, that's a rough way to go. If I was him, I would do the crap out of that organization.
Crazy stuff. Any thoughts about Tyrod? Probably not, but maybe.
Yeah, I think it's similar to like what we're talking about with Wentz, like these guys who've done it before and shown they can be viable for you. Similar to Gardner Minshew last year, right? They orchestrate offense. Like the difference is like I think Tyrod gives you a little bit more mobility, and like same thing with Wentz. Like he's had injuries, but like these guys are more mobile, so they give you a little rushing on top of it too. So I think we kind of had the same thought process with that. I just think, I actually like the Tyrod call. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, and they both have a running game, right? Which is definitely helpful. They both have multiple weapons in the receiving game. If you want to go ahead and count whatever the Jets are rolling out at wide receiver 2 these days. But they at least have decent play calling there and something in place. And we know if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, he's going to be helping out the offense like he was last year. So, we will see what happens there. But let's move on from all of the disgusting bottom of the bin quarterbacks and move to all of the disgusting bottom of the bin running backs. Jesse, you actually have the highest percentage of the 3 guys that I picked. And then you also have the lowest percentage. So let's talk first about your 21.6% rostered running back.
So that'd be Jawhar Jordan, the rookie that the Texans just drafted. It's really like, even if Dameon Pierce is still viable, I think there's a role for Jawhar Jordan to play. Now he's not the biggest guy. He's 5'10", he's 193. He kind of does a lot for you. And I think he fits the scheme really well. If you look at his college stats, it was a slow progression for him. Like he had 29 attempts and up to 142 and 181 his last season. He also did a little bit of receiving work as well, where he had 21 receptions and a 7% target share at Louisville. I think the guy just really fits talent-wise into the scheme of what Slowick wants to run. And if you remember, this was the biggest issue with Dameon Pierce last season. This is why they brought in Mixon. This is why they brought in Singletary, because Singletary fit the scheme better. And when you take a running back and they fit the scheme better, it just works out so much better because it's not a round peg in a square hole. You just fit them in and it works. And then their talent is able to get accentuated and maximized. So this is kind of why I'm in on a rookie, Jawhar Jordan. Now, he did go late in the draft, so like I'm not expecting him to be the best player in the world. Like he went undrafted. But overall, I think there is upside for him in this offense, and he could push Dameon Pierce for snaps. Now, obviously, I think Pierce is the better overall talent, but like when it comes to situation and fit, like I like just stashing guys like this in case something does happen to Mixon, because then it's really up to if they trust whoever they trust. And I know there's been a lot of hype about Pierce this entire offseason, so maybe he's finally turned the corner and figured it out. But I'm betting on the unknown of the rookie in the Houston backfield because it's going to be one of the better rushing attacks in the NFL. There's going to be a really good offense with Stroud. So I kind of want pieces attached to that offense. And if something happens, you get a guy that you can trust, and they could be a fantasy viable guy for you. So that's kind of my case for Jordan. I know he's a little bit higher than your guys. Are you willing to stash that type of player?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, the rookie unknown is probably better than what we already know Damian Pierce is. Certainly, he has the ability to kind of bounce back. The coaches are saying all the right things in camp. We don't know, however, at this stage, what's motivation and what is just kind of the normal coach speak. We've seen this happen time and time again every offseason where they talk up a guy and then they cut him a week later
Mhm.
just because they have to make room, right? At least we know Jawhar Jordan has the opportunity to make this team. At Louisville, he had 6.19 yards per carry, which at Louisville is pretty decent. He
Mhm.
also had 14 total TDs.
Yep.
The problem for that I worry about with him is he's 25 years old. So without looking it up, I'm going to guess he's older than Damian Pierce.
Yeah, they're
but
about the same age. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. He's
so
not young. He was in
yeah,
college for 5 years because
yeah.
he was at Syracuse before that. Transferred to Louisville in 2021 with the COVID stuff, and yeah, finally broke out at Louisville, unlike Syracuse.
So that's really my only concern with him. But yeah, if you're comfortable taking a shot at Damian Pierce, and I think you should be because you're going to want a piece of this offense, and Joe Mixon is no spring chicken, right? He's got the ability to go down with injury for sure if given the workload that they're promising to give him as he's gotten every year in Cincinnati. So if you're comfortable taking a shot on Damian Pierce, I think you should also be comfortable taking a shot on Jawhar Jordan. Absolutely. My guy is, we'll see. I got a couple of guys here, but at 10.4% rostered, I'm going to talk about Kevin Harris. Kevin Harris is the number 3 in New England right now, but we know that Ramondre Stevenson is typically the workhorse over there. He's going to get all of the opportunity he can handle. We know that Antonio Gibson is going to come in and do a little passing down work, be a change of pace guy. But Kevin Harris has, I wouldn't say shown flashes because that's not accurate, but he's shown confidence in the backfield. And,
Mhm.
right now in camp, he's being chalked up as a guy who's far and away better than everyone else, not named Stevenson and Gibson in this backfield. So the fact that he can step in. We talked with the quarterbacks about guys who can step in right away. If the starter goes down with injury, I think Kevin Harris is that guy. If Ramondre Stevenson goes down with injury, you're going to see Gibson get a larger load. At the same time, Kevin Harris is going to step in and be the short yardage and goal line guy and take over a good portion of what Ramondre was doing on early downs. So, even though the team isn't great, I think Kevin Harris has the ability to still be out there and be productive in that situation. So I'm happy enough with him. I'm happy enough with what I've seen from him in the past and what's going on here that I'll take him and stash him for not only this season, but future seasons. The other thing that I like about Kevin Harris is he's only 23 years old.
Yeah, I like Kevin Harris coming out of South Carolina. I thought he was a good do-it-all back that could do everything for you. Now, he did have the back injury concerns that hampered him at South Carolina, and also probably the reason why he went later in the draft. But he's a guy that people hold on to for this exact reason because he's able to hold his role in offense. Yeah, and 100. Yeah, and yeah. See, exactly. So
had to drop
it's kind of that time where you have to put your feet to the fire. You're like, all right, Kevin Harris, see you later. But no, I get it. If you have these back end of the roster spots, this is exactly what this is the type of guy it is. Those last 5 on any Dynasty roster, I'll just complete cycle through. So anybody that gets hype or has the role like Kevin Harris has, there's a pathway to touches potentially, and that's what I want to see. Because speaking of Gibson, he's the opposite of consistent. So this is how if Harris continues to show out and does what he does, he can push Gibson for touches because Gibson will frustrate any coach because he's up and down all over the place. Just because he's not a running back, man. He's just not a running back. That's what it is.
100%. I don't want to talk about him too much, but I also like the guys in the Jacksonville backfield. We've got Dearness Johnson, 12% owned, and we have Keilan Robinson, rookie, 10% owned. Look,
I like him.
One of these guys probably isn't going to make the team, but the other one has the opportunity to be the RB2. We saw Tank Bigsby last season. I'm hopeful. Again, this is just like the Houston backfield. I'm hopeful for Pierce. I'm hopeful for Bigsby, but there's no way I'm counting on those guys being the clear-cut backup. In Jacksonville, I think it's either Johnson or Robinson that will push Bigsby to be that backup. I prefer Dearness Johnson over Keilan Robinson simply because we've seen him do it before on Cleveland years ago. However, you can pick your poison with either one of these guys, and I think they're a good back to stash.
Yeah, 100%. they've been struggling to find that running back behind ETN. And this is something they've said for like the past couple of years. They want someone they can trust behind him because they don't want to have to give ETN 350 touches a year. They don't think that's the most efficient way to go about it. The issue was last year, Big B was such a disaster, like they didn't have anyone else. And this is how I think like Dearness Johnson earned himself a role, like because he was just better and he did what he wanted. So we'll see. I think investing in the backup there is 100% a good way to go because if it goes down, like if ETN gets hurt because he already has suffered a season-ending injury, if that happens again, you're going to get somebody who can be potentially fantasy viable. And that's what we want these running back positions.
For sure. Speaking of fantasy viable, you found a guy who's 0% rostered, Jesse. Who do you have?
Two of them. I found two of them. So those don't know, Deontay Foreman has suffered a leg injury on the kick return today. His leg was immobilized in a cast. They airlifted him out. So he's going to be gone for a long time. What the thing is in that running back room, until Nick Chubb fully comes back, they don't have a guy who's going to fill that Kareem Hunt role because Deontay Foreman was going to be that guy that Kareem Hunt was doing down the goal line work and doing that. Yeah. So there's two guys I want to target because they're both at 0%. The more interesting guy, because I didn't know like much about him, is Aidan Robbins. He's a 230-pound running back. Like the guy's a freaking tank. So I was like, okay. So naturally I'm thinking, does this guy have a shot at making the roster? I think it's high. Like I think you're basically throwing a true dart if he makes the roster because of the current running backs in the room. Like the guy that they like, I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. It's not Pierce Strong.
Ford.
It's Jerome Ford. Not a goal line and not a guy you want in short yardage situations. That's not how he's successful. He's getting more passing down back. So it's really comes down to John Kelly, who has been a name that we've floated around a long time. He's also at 0%. If you remember him with LA drafted him in like 2019. He got a little bit of hype. It never worked out. Yep. He has a little bit of hype coming out of preseason camp. So I'm more interested in John Kelly, but he's also at 0% on. If you want to go the Aidan Robbins route because he's a rookie, he's a little more unknown, you could go that route too. So I think there's two guys that could push for that, basically the early down work and also the goal line, like short yardage work. I think that's kind of missing that Cleveland offense until Nick Chubb comes back. And like we've talked about exclusively, like I don't really want to bet on Chubb because you're basically betting on something to do someone that we have not seen in the longest time. So Foreman's also a guy who told his Achilles a long time ago, and he finally came back from it. So it's really unfortunate that Foreman's like healthy again and he suffers another injury. It is what it is. But I just want to invest in this offense because I think there's theoretical upside in a good offense, which this offense seems like it's going to be. So those are the two guys I'm targeting in Cleveland.
Yeah, and Cleveland, I think, still a top 5 offensive line. Certainly a bunch of road graders over there. Still, one of the top rushing blockers for offensive lines in the league. I don't necessarily trust Jerome Ford, so I'm happy to take shots on these other guys. I had a lot of Deontay Foreman, so I'm going to have to go back and check all my rosters and figure out who else I'm going to stash with these guys. But yeah, whoever it is in Cleveland, look, Kareem Hunt is still available. He may come back and try and give it one more push that's going to look ugly. But if he does, at least he'll get you 3.4 yards a carry. And if he gets 300 carries, if he lets them run him into the ground, you never know what's going to happen. But that's enough running back talk. I hate talking about running backs regularly, especially these guys. So let's switch to my favorite topic, wide receiver. And let's start with you, Jesse. Who do you like at wide receiver to stash at the end of your dynasty bench?
All right, this is the guy that we've heard a little bit out of. He's coming out of the Ivy League, and if you know anything about guys out of the Ivy League, Andrei Iosivas came out a couple of years ago, and he's actually, I know we're really hyped about Jermaine Burton, but Andrei Iosivas is the other Ivy League guy that I like. He's got enough hype where he's past 25% threshold. So if you can get Iosivas, I would get him. The guy actually is Mason Tipton, and he's in the Saints. He's a little bit smaller, he's a little undersized. So he's not a big-bodied wide receiver, but he's fast. He's quick pitch. If you look at his Ivy League stats, the guy was a beast. He was a 3-time All-Ivy League selection. He has the 3rd most receiving touchdowns in Yale history. He has the 6th most receiving yards in Yale history and a career 15.6 yards per reception. So the guy did a lot in the Yale offense, and he was kind of what they depended on. So the Saints have given him a shot, and he's made headway because if you look at their wide receiver room, it's not very good outside of Shaheed and Chris Olave. There's not much there. So I don't mind stashing a Mason Tipton, seeing how it works out, because it seems like he's going to be a do-it-all guy for them if he earns a role. Now, he still has to earn the role and earn all that, but we're talking a guy that's like really low owned that most people still don't even know who he is. So I like stashing this type of player because there is room in an unknown wide receiver room. Like they talked about how they're going to use that offense, a new OC. So he has a way to make a pathway and make a role in year one. So I'm all aboard stashing this type of player.
Yeah. I love Rashid Shaheed as the wide receiver too. I do
Mhm.
not understand the A.T. Perry hype. I think he's fine. So there is certainly room for Mason Tipton there. And he's getting the buzz right now. I am not going to be one to make that bet on stashing him, but he's only 5% owned here. Like he is trending on Sleeper, but he's still just 5% owned. So you have a chance to find the guy who becomes the wide receiver 3 out of the gate. We know there are issues with tight ends there. They don't really have a reliable guy that they can throw in there. We know that Alvin Kamara is just aging, and they don't really have a reliable receiving back outside of him. So if you can find the wide receiver 3 who then has that contingent upside to become something more if Olave or Rashid go down, that's an interesting bet to make. Certainly, we don't love it with Derek Carr, but we are scraping the bottom of the barrel. And, Mason Tipton, I think, is a much better dynasty stash than my dynasty stash, Charlie Jones. Charlie Jones, also teammate of Andrei. You said Iosivas. I've heard Iosivas. I don't know how to
I'm not
pronounce
100% sure of his name. Yeah, I can't say I don't know.
But Yosa gonna get in the end zone, score some touchdowns. I mean, that guy was kind of a monster for a couple of weeks there with T. Higgins out last season and no Joe Burrow. But Charlie Jones has also shown some flashes. I'm happy I'm betting on either of these guys. We know T. Higgins is gone next season. There's no guarantee that Jermaine Burton makes the jump that we're all expecting him to. If he doesn't, one of these guys, and maybe Burton is just the stretch the field deeper threat guy. We know that Jamar Chase is going to be peppered with targets, so maybe an underneath guy like Charlie Jones or Iosivas who can also play a better role in the end zone than Burton. It's all possible there. So I like Jones or Iosivas there at cost. They're both under 25% owned. What are you thinking about either one of these Bengals receivers?
Yeah, the one thing on Charlie Jones is he's a little bit older coming out. So he is a little bit older than these guys, so you got to take into consideration. The thing about his profile coming out is you kind of penciled him in to be the replacement for Tyler Boyd once they moved on from Tyler Boyd. And guess what? They moved on from Tyler Boyd. So what we're looking for is, I think Charlie Jones fits that middle of the field, like underneath role, a little bit better than, say, Iosivas does, because like Iosivas is the big downfield threat, so they're kind of different wide receivers. So I think Iosivas and Burton kind of compete with each other is how that goes. So I'm with you. I want to just target whoever the third option is in that passing attack. So maybe it's one of those guys. And I mean, maybe it could be the tight end who will, like Eric All, but like he's dealing with injury. He's still not fully back, so it's probably going to be a while. I think Eric All is going to be like a long-term play because it's just like it's hard enough for a rookie, but he's coming off a severe injury. Got to learn. Like I'd much rather bet on these wide receivers this year and see how it shakes out. Because like we've seen Burrow support multiple wide receivers in that offense. So 100%, yeah, I'm fine with Charlie Jones, Iosivas, either one of those guys. Like I like stashing both of them.
Yeah, and I love the Eric All stash. He just did not fall into our criteria of less than 25% owned. The rookies get hype, so we know that these guys are not necessarily as available as we'd like to be. Charlie Jones, Iosivas, I'm good with either one of those guys. Again, scraping the bottom of the barrel. I just want to throw out a few names here, Jesse, two in particular that I really love. Tim Patrick coming off of catastrophic injury with no competition in Denver. Nelson Agholar, the deep threat guy who can actually catch passes now after he failed to do so in Philly. And the guy catching babies out of a third-story window in Philly was, lambasting this guy all over Philadelphia news. Patrick, Agholar, how do you feel about these guys? Both of these guys under 20% owned.
Yeah, I struggle with Patrick a little bit because Patrick's not young. Like this, I think this 30. Was he's old and hasn't broken out, and then he has severe injury. So the thing to your point in Denver's like wide receiver room is it's atrocious. Like I hate to break it to the Broncos fans, like Marvin Mims did absolutely nothing. We'll see if Troy Franklin could be anything, but he's a day 3 wide receiver. Like these guys don't do anything. The thing about that I like about Patrick is like whenever they've talked about him, they said he's been like the best wide receiver on that team. Like last year, the hype around him was he was better than all the other wide receivers. If he can get back to being healthy and being that guy, then like there's potentially a massive pathway for him to be like, I don't think the wide receiver one, but he could push that and you can be good because it's a rookie quarterback. You don't know how it's going to shake out. So if he finds his guy and if that's Patrick, like the upsides, particularly when we're talking like this percent of rostership. With Agholar, I think the talent's always been there. this is similar to Jalen Reagor. Like I saw a camp of Jalen Reagor where basically he got completely outworked in a drill by Jalen Polk. It wasn't even close. He was looking like he's going through the motion. Polk absolutely dusted him in the drill. And it's there's the issue with Jalen Reagor right there, right? So I think with Agholar, it took him a while to figure it out and get back to who he really is to be, but the talent's always been there. So yeah, you're talking about Agholar. I'm fine doing that. That clip, by the way, is fucking hilarious. That's one of the best clips of all time. The fan is just like, I'm so fed up with Agholar. He got no hands. But yeah, I think 100%, like when we're talking about stashing players, like I want to bet on guys with talented profiles who got the draft capital or were good picks coming out. And maybe it's taking them a little way to figure it out because in the end, talent usually wins. This is kind of my issue with Jermaine Burton is he's his biggest own, like he was his own problem. Like throughout college, he's always been an issue. So if he doesn't figure it out, it might take him a while. So similar to Agholar and those guys, he might go that pathway. I'm not saying he's going to. I'm just saying it's potentially there. But yeah, like I like when you get a guy similar to Wentz. We talk about maybe their age, they've been more mature. Maybe Aguilar's figured out, and maybe he's becoming that good NFL player because he's been viable the last couple of years. Like he's done some good things for you. So yeah, I'm fine with Aguilar.
Yeah, and he's really the only deep threat on the team that Lamar looks to routinely. So yeah, I'm happy with that as well. I also cited Brandon Powell. He's interesting. A couple other interesting names that I just can't bring myself to do anymore. Paris Campbell is the big one, 18% owned. I just can't do it, especially on that Giants team. And Justin Shorter on the Bills, who is second year, maybe third year, but certainly now he's a little bit more buried there. So we have Shorter, we have Paris Campbell, we have Brandon Powell. Any of those, all of those, what do you think of those guys?
Yeah, like with guys like Shorter, when you look at the pathway for them, it's kind of hard, right? Because he's not the biggest wide receiver in the world. Like, it's kind of is what it is. So, like, excuse me, he is a really big wide receiver, but like they brought in freaking what's his face? I'm like I was saying, the guy from they got in the knucklehead from Pittsburgh a few years ago. What is his name? I'm blanking on
Claypool, Chase Claypool.
Yeah, so Claypool. So they brought in multiple of these type of wide receivers to kind of fill that big bodied role. I think like obviously they're going to push into kind of what Kincaid does too. So when you have this pathway of guys that are blocked by superior talents, who we think, and also like high end guys in that role, it's just really difficult for them. So if they can earn that role, sure. I just don't know how he gets onto the field unless we're hearing. So this is like where the camp news from the reporters comes out because you have to listen. And if they're continually doing a drumbeat for someone, like we've heard for certain players this offseason, that's kind of when you start hopping in. And like with Shorter, it's just like I haven't heard much of anything. Like this is like literally I've looked for the Bills. I haven't heard any hype for him all offseason. So I think he's pretty buried. Like he's the definition of a guy that's just absolutely buried. And maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. With Campbell, it's injuries, man. Like the guy just can't stay healthy. So if it works out, it works out. But like we're talking about a guy they have 18 versions of him on that team already. So it's like, how is he going to stand out? Particularly when you have Jalen Reagor, or it's not Jalen, I'm all over the place. Malik Neighbors, like he's the guy that is going to be.
He corrected me here as well. Paris Campbell now on the Eagles. Okay. So I want him even less.
It's a difficult pathway for him because we talk about the slot wide receiver, the tight end there. It's like, all right, so now you got to go into Dallas Goedert, who's going to run a lot of the same stuff, and then they'd like sign a couple other guys who we hyped up a little bit, like we talk about the Aeneas Smiths of the world. It's I don't know how he gets on the field. Like that's the hardest part because they have so much talent in that. They might have one of the most talented rooms, just like skill position was. So it's like really, really difficult for him. So with these other guys, you can kind of find a pathway because it's like less talent. When it's that talented, like you just have to be super good. And we've never seen it from Campbell. I think his profile, similar to Terry McLaurin coming out, was risky. The difference is Terry McLaurin proved he's good. Campbell's never given us that shot. So maybe I think it's kind of unfortunate of him.
Yeah, and the Eagles have also been talking up Will Shipley a ton, especially using him out of the slot. He's not going to be a full-time slot guy, but certainly would be interesting to kind of change up some formations there, using Shipley more. Like you mentioned, Aeneas Smith drafted him late, but he's a burner. You also have the albatross, Johnny Wilson, over there. Yes. He was used in the slot. When Keon Coleman was a little bit outside of Florida State at times, he can operate in there. And with his ridiculous wingspan, I think he's going to be a threat in the red zone. I think Paris Campbell is really just this close to the line of scrimmage, ridiculously short, Rondale Moore-esque and he's just going to be running a bunch of crossers, and he's not going to score any touchdowns for you. So I had a lot of hope for Paris Campbell for years in Indy. I can't do it anymore. Paris Campbell completely off my board, but I think for good reason. Philadelphia is going to do what Philadelphia does. They're going to pepper their top 3 targets, and now they have a running game. Saquon Barkley, Will Shipley to boot. So, yeah, for me, Campbell's completely off my board.
I will say he was the first guy that Sirianni brought up when they're talking about the wide receiver 3 spot. So, like, you could take that for what it is, but just pay attention to it. Like, if we get continually drumbeat for him, then yeah. Like, I will say if you want to stash him, go for it. Like, I'm just personally not a guy, so I'll go.
Agree. Let's finally dive into tight ends, because why not? Let's get nasty with tight ends. I'll leave your guy because I think he's actually interesting. I'll leave your guy for last. We'll talk about some guys who are higher rostered, but not so interesting that I chose. Kylen Granson on Indy. He's 18% owned. As Jesse mentioned to me before the show, running with the ones in camp. Tanner McLachlan in Cincinnati. We talked about Eric All. We haven't talked about Mike Gesicki. Maybe he gets some run. Probably not. He's done. But, they have a lot of other options there in Cincy. But Tanner McLachlan at least is interesting. I think they took him in the 4th, maybe 5th round, right around where they took All. So those guys weren't necessarily too far off. But unfortunately, Joe Burrow hasn't shown that he's throwing to tight ends a lot. So what do you think about those 2 guys, Granson, McLachlan? Do you want either of them? None of them? Who cares? What do you think?
So I'm going to answer this question from Jamie first.
Yeah.
Name cachet. It's prospect profile that people like. That's the only freaking reason this guy's raw. Like, he's buried with the Chargers. Like, it's not going to happen for him. So, yeah, like, there's certain guys in Dynasty that people likes coming out. They're talking about as RB1. This is what people are holding on to him with him. Hey, Jerry, thanks for joining us. For me, it's easily Kylen Granson. Like, I want a guy who's going to run snaps and run routes. The thing with, like, Mo Alley, Cox, Johnny Woods, and those guys is it's been a motley crew. And Jelani Woods he did season-ending injury last year, so maybe he's not right. It is what it is. I want the freaking tight end attached to Anthony Richardson in this offense. It's going to be one of the fastest-paced offenses. They're going to have, like, the most play potentials. They might lead the league in total plays. So I want the tight end in that offense. And if it's Kylen Granson, which, by the way, he had a really good, like, RAS score coming out, Indigo profile. He was a 4th-round pick. He's not like he's this guy that's cast away. It's just they've been taking shots on tight end trying to figure it out. Kylen Granson's also dealing with injury. So I'll take the tight end one attached to him. And, like, that's what I want with these dynasty stashes. Tight ends that could be starting viable tight ends, because, and particularly in tight end premium leagues, I doubt it's less likely he's available, but if he's available, it should be absolutely picking, like, pounding the waiver for tight ends that are starting in. Yeah. I think this is your pathway to getting a starting tight end that people have discounted and just discarded because they want Jelani Woods to be a thing. We haven't seen it yet, so I'm going to bet on Kylen Granson first for sure.
Yeah. I agree. They have some monsters over there in Indy. Kylen Granson just 6'3", 242, but he fits that build of kind of the modern tight end. The fact that they can have a little bit more wiggle, they can get away from safeties or even slot corners at times and create some separation. Granson has that ability. Over the last 2 seasons, 30 receptions each season, of somewhere hovering around 300 and 350 yards. So he's shown that he can be productive in spurts. And I think if they're able to get him going, that's best case for that offense. If you think about the fact that you have Michael Pittman on one side, Adonai Mitchell on the other, and then you have who's shown flashes and looked great so far. And then you have the combination of Josh Downs and Kylen Granson working the middle to intermediate area of the field. I love that for Indy's offense. I think Anthony Richardson's still being slept on as a passer. And we know who's it, Sykin over there. We know he's going to be able to create an offense that suits everyone. So yeah, 100% Kylen Granson. Tanner McLachlan, I don't know. I'll take a shot, but I do prefer Eric All. So go with Granson. Let's talk about your guy who is far less owned at just 8%.
The Dis Monster, baby. As a Seahawks fan, we were quite hyped for Will Dissly, and then he had a serious leg injury, and it kind of derailed his career a little bit. What we like about Dissly is he's a good blocking tight end who can do receiving work as well. For those that don't know, he's running with the ones with the Chargers. This is what I'm talking about with these tight ends. The tight ends kind of get slept on going into the year because they're forgotten names. with the Chargers, people are like, oh, it's Stone Smart. It's whoever it is. Now, it turns out it's Disley. And I've been hearing reports that he's far and away better than every other tight end on that roster. So what that tells me is he's going to be their starting tight end this year and the one running routes. And do you want a tight end running routes for catching passes from Justin Herbert? Because I do. And I know the theoretical upside of like top 5 might not be there, but he's a guy like you could play every so often in right weeks and matchups to go from there. And like we talk about their wide receiver room, it's not looking great so far in the Chargers. And with how Greg Roman has used his tight ends, by the way, they have been very beneficial in offenses. Now, I'm not saying he's Mark Andrews, or I'm not saying he's like a George Kittle or those guys in the past years like that, or like a Vernon Davis. But I think he could be a viable guy for where he gives you 50 catches, 500 yards a season. And I think that's okay. Like, I'd be fine with that. And if he gets the touchdowns, that's how he gets in there. So, yeah, I'm fine stashing like Will Disley. I at his rostership rate, I think he should be a lot higher owned than he currently is right now. What do you think about Disley?
100%. And before we talk Disley, let's talk a little bit about just the rest of the guys on this roster and what he's facing. Ladd McConkey, they love him. He should be the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver and number 1 target earner on this team. Outside of that, you have Joshua Palmer battling DJ Chark for targets. DJ Chark. Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Is like DJ Chark is being talked up because he's being put next to Joshua Palmer and like, oh, these guys are kind of similar. That's not a good thing for fantasy. So it's really interesting to think about who could be the number 1 tight end. Hayden Hurst is on this team. He was signed there. He's 30 years old, however, and he's not as big as you want him to be. He's only 245 pounds. Donald Parham is on this team. He hasn't shown anything. He's 6'8", but he's 6'8" and only 237 pounds. He's never proven to be a blocker in this league. Will Disley, how big is Will Disley, Jesse?
He ain't that big.
He's 6'4", 265 pounds. The guy is like an extra lineman out there. It's the reason he's starting. And you have Stone Smart, who's smaller than all of them. But it's the reason that Disley is out there for his blocking acumen. But the thing is, if he's out there blocking, he's going to get the opportunity to be out there and catching some balls too on play action. Especially he was utilized that way earlier in his career with Russell Wilson, and he had some monster games. He had a monster year in there. So if he is the number 1 guy over Hurst, over a guy like Smart, I love it, and I'll be taking Will Disley a lot this year.
I'll give you a little history of Disley. So his injury history includes a torn Achilles, torn patella, and a broken leg that was just a gnarly broken. Like it's kind of crazy this guy's still playing NFL and being a viable NFL tight end, dealing what he's dealt with. But like Carroll's called him one of the toughest players he's ever met, and there's a reason for that. That he's like, you know what, I don't care my body. Like we're still doing this another year. So overall, I'm in on Will Disley. I think the name Jeremy Ruckert's an interesting name. How do you feel about Jeremy Ruckert, the Jets tight end, who you could kind of make the case for as a sleeper, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting over there in New York. I mean, obviously, the number 1 for me is Tyler Conklin. I think he's quite clearly the guy. He's proven everywhere he's gone when he's healthy that he can be productive in the passing game. He's only 29 years old. I actually thought he was a little bit older than that, so that's interesting. But certainly you want guys who can catch passes from Aaron Rodgers. And the wide receivers after Garrett Wilson aren't really anything to write home about, especially when you're talking about Malachi Corley, Xavier Gibson, Alan Lazard. These aren't necessarily your traditional target hogs, although Rodgers does love him some Alan Lazard. But you got Conklin, you got Ruckert, and you got Zach Kuntz, who I think is interesting. Anthony Ferkser is probably there now just as a blocking tight end, so I'm not worried about him. But Ruckert for me, I don't know. I think I prefer Kuntz over Ruckert, but it's an interesting name nonetheless.
Yeah, he got injured in the severity that's unknown, but that's why they brought in Ferkser, because he got hurt. So Ferkser brought in. So it's kind of TBD with Ruckert. The interesting thing with Kuntz is the guy didn't play. Like we talk about Zach Kuntz and like people were super hyped for him, didn't get on the field. So that should tell you he's a project of project. Like I know he transferred from Penn State, went to Old Dominion. It took him a while, and he finally broke out of Old Dominion. Like Penn State, he did nothing. I think he's just one of those guys that's going to be super tantalizing with athleticism, but like he's just not going to be a viable tight end. I think it's a project for like type player that still has a long way to go. If he wasn't able to get on the field last year with what the Jets were putting out there, Like their offense was not very good outside of Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. So you think there would be something for him, and they were just like, nah, dude, like we're just not even going to play you. So that's one of those guys. It's like that's the definition of a dynasty. Actually, hold on to, hope it works out. Probably isn't going to work out because like we talk about the Conklins of the world, like they're not the best players, but he's far and away, like he's run away with that camp. So that should kind of tell you where those two players are at. So Ruckert's going to be a stash for a long, long time. I think we're probably just better off just dropping Ruckert.
100%. Do not stash tight ends for a long, long time unless they are way younger. Jeremy Ruckert is, but he's got a quarterback change coming up in the next year or two. Let's quickly talk about this guy. He's not nasty enough to include in our list. He's 95% owned, but of course we like Isaiah Likely. So Jerry says, do we like him to have a bigger standalone role with a healthy Mark Andrews in the mix? What are you thinking about Likely?
I struggle with this. I know like there's been camp hype around him in the drumbeat. I think what this does is he chips into like he kind of affects the other players. Like outside of Zay Flowers, like he's going to hurt the Rashad Bateman. He's going to hurt these other guys in that offense where they can play a lot of 2 tight end or like 3 tight end sets if they really wanted to this year. I don't know if that's the way they're going to go. So my whole thought process with Likely is he's the ultimate like handcuff because you could just throw him in and he'll give you similar production to Andrews. But like when he's been on the field, like being the tight end one, he's been not Andrews just because Mark Andrews is one of the best tight ends in the NFL. He is down a little bit, but like it's hard to ignore the camp hype. I just don't know how you're going to consistently start with this guy. That's my whole question mark with him. Now, if we're talking about rostering him, yeah, I'll happily roster him. I think he's valuable. I would just, at some point, I would like to flip Likely off of a touchdown week or a week where he goes off. I would like to sell high in Isaiah Likely because people are really bullish on this guy. But if you think about it, like, outside of the freaking Patriots in 2007, 2011, when it was like Rodgers and Hernandez and Gronkowski, when's the last time we had like 2 tight ends ever be like super viable in fantasy? Like it just never happens, right? So I think it's just one of those guys that's a better NFL player than a better fantasy player. Where are you kind of at with Likely? Is like, are you in on him? Like, are you kind of where I'm at with him?
I'm in on him to the extent that he's an interesting stash. I have him stashed in a few spots, but a fair amount of those spots I have Mark Andrews, right? So like you said, he's kind of like one of the only tight end handcuffs that you would want to have in Dynasty. And again, we're talking deeper benches. I'm not sold on Rashad Bateman. I think he's good enough. I think the problem is he still needs to get on the same page with Lamar Jackson. I don't think the offense is suited to Bateman, and Lamar has proven over the last couple of years to prefer Nelson Agholar to Bateman for whatever reason. Bateman's not going to overtake Flowers. He's not going to overtake Mark Andrews. So it's at least interesting to me that Likely can play a big slot role at times. Yeah. We know he's not going to be the preferred slot option, but to come in certain packages, to come in red zone, I think it's interesting. And in tight end premium leagues, especially, it's pretty interesting to have him stashed in case you see kind of that regular cadence with him where he's getting 5 looks a game. It's possible. But I think this team is ready to run the football. You got Derrick Henry. You got hopefully Keaton Mitchell back. Rasheen Ali, Justice Hill. I mean, they should probably sign another running back here once cuts are made. This team needs to run the ball more than they're passing it. I don't really want anyone, like you said, outside of Andrews and Flowers.
Yeah, we've heard we'll hear about every preseason like, oh, this running back's running out, snaps out wide, running in the slot. That's what Likely was talking about earlier this offseason, where it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna move me all over formation and put me in the backfield out on the slot. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, that just seems super unlikely. They're not going to put you as H-back. Like, yeah, go play the Kyle Jakowski role. I just don't – I think it's super unlikely, like, we actually see that. But, yeah, I think he's a good NFL player. I like investing in good NFL players overall when it comes down to it. Theoretically.
Yeah, and just one more thing with this camp hype, right? Like, this is camp hype season. We can't fall victim to this, guys. Newsflash, guys in the NFL are good, right? Like, so if they put a guy in a role, he's going to look good on a couple of plays here, standalone. Meanwhile, if you put Xavier Worthy on a big bodied corner and he gets shoved into a linebacker, he's going to get his clock licked or whatever. I don't know don't be licking clocks out there, but whatever the terminology is.
Clock clean?
There, he cleaned his clock. He's going to get licked. I don't know. He's going to get put on his ass, basically.
Did you see that he had a big play touchdown today? Like that was the camp hype on Worthy. Yeah, exactly.
Listen,
I'm like, dude, this is worthy. This is worthy.
I also saw your tweet saying Jonathan Brooks all day over Worthy with the Worthy video. So listen, but this is prime camp hype season. So let's not get too high or too low on some of these guys. And the teams are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're kind of experimenting, moving these guys around, figuring out where they fit. And a lot of this is contingency. They're trying to figure out what to do in the event that guys go down. Where can they play? So the fact that like Deneric Prince is running with the ones, no, I don't care, right? It's Isaiah Pacheco all day. Is it interesting that he keeps running over Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Yes. Also Clyde Edwards-Helaire sucks. So, that shouldn't also be super surprising. But yeah, let's not get so carried away with all of these takes. We've seen likely now for multiple seasons on the field, a lot more when Mark Andrews is out, and off the field a lot more when Mark Andrews is in. So that's likely going to continue, pardon the pun, continue the way that Baltimore operates. And they're going to continue to use Rashad Bateman. They're going to continue to use Agholar, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I took your point on Deneric Prince, though. Like, that's a guy I want to stash if he's available. He was above the threshold from what I saw. But, like, if you can get the backup, which I'm pretty sure he's going to be the backup of Kansas City, like, that's the guy we want, right? Because if the injury goes down, that's how it becomes viable. But, yeah, like, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we appreciate you joining us for this disgusting dive into the Dynasty trenches. We've given you a couple of guys at each position that you can try to stash. But of course, as always in Dynasty, we're just kind of making the best possible bets on some of these players. If they hit, guess what? In most cases, you're going to try to trade them immediately. So you don't necessarily want to keep these guys on your rosters. Stash and then, cash in once they hit. So thanks again for joining us. I am Jeremy Schulman. This is Jesse Moeller. We are the Fantasy Football Universe at fantasyfootballuniverse.com, on Twitter, on TikTok, on YouTube, on everywhere you want to be. We're going to continue this throughout the offseason daily. Come find us, like, subscribe, do everything to help us continue this content. And we'll see you in season for everything. We'll post something soon, too, about our August 31st AMA on the Fantasy Football subreddit. Looking forward to that. So once again, for Jesse, I am Jeremy, and we will see you next time.